So let's take a look at a few very early figures for how certain factions are getting on in tournaments and competitive play. After the big points update, which armies are looking strong, mid or weak? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought it would be interesting to take a quick look at some win rates for Warhammer 40k, taking a very early and fairly rough and ready look at which armies are doing well or badly in game right now, in the first couple of weeks since the balance update has dropped. I was kind of interested to take a look in at this due to Games Workshop's Metawatch video this week. I feel like for the most part these videos are kind of harmless enough. Often they give us a few small hints as to what sort of things they're thinking about doing next with 40k, both in terms of balance updates coming next and what armies they think are a bit strong and might need toning down in one way or another. I felt like the video that they went for this one was kind of filler and nothingy really. It was perhaps a bit earlier than I might have expected, coming literally a couple of weeks after they made big points updates to the game, and Games Workshop themselves do tend to be a little bit cautious in immediately posting numbers straight after balance updates have happened, and not without good reason really. A little bit of data that could just be down to random chance can make some things look like they really aren't, maybe can be a bit misleading, though I think it's still interesting enough to take a look at some early numbers if you put them in context and know that things could change greatly, both as people adapt to the new meta and also just with raw numbers so that things aren't really down to random chance. It was a bit disappointing that in the last few weeks they didn't actually post any graphs whatsoever, even just before making their last balance change. I think it's one of the things that people really look forward to in that series, just to be able to see Games Workshop's own take on the 40k balance numbers and what they're going to do about it. I thought that's what we could look at a bit today from community numbers. Otherwise, for the sum up of their Metawatch, the basic news was that there's going to be a tournament in Dallas this week, which we already know. It's where they're going to be doing that 40k reveal show that's coming on Saturday. That's probably going to be Sisters and Genestealer Cult, plus maybe a few more interesting things beyond that. They also mentioned that this might be one of the first times to see certain codecs having gone live with their new points, particularly the Tau. Though Custodies and Orcs haven't been out for too long, I did notice that they kind of refrained from giving the Custodies too much attention, given how awfully that book was received. Otherwise, they mentioned that Orc Bully Boys and maybe Green Tide are being kept an eye on to see whether or not they're going to be too strong. It does look like they're doing kind of well out the gate. And they reiterated that AdMake are getting rules changes in the next update in summer. Again, what we already knew. I guess that's just not really much news at this point, though I think just doing a bit of a nothingy video was kind of reflected in people's reaction. It didn't get the healthiest like to dislike ratio on YouTube. In any case, in absence of any sort of numbers from Games Workshop, I thought it could be interesting just to take a look at some community numbers. There's really quite a lot of sources gathering some data and posting results, even in the first couple of weeks after a points update like this. There's StatCheck 40k, Meta Monday, Den of Fools, and Goonhammer's 40k Stat Center. I'll leave links to those down in the video description below. Otherwise, I thought it would be interesting just to take a look through some rough and ready win rate numbers to see how armies are shaping up in the first few weeks and give us some sort of hints as to where the meta's headed from here. Again, just to underline that further, this is based on basically 2 weeks worth of tournament data, in my opinion not really anywhere near enough to take the numbers too seriously at this point. So take this table as a very rough initial take. I'm certain that some things will change in big ways as more data becomes available, and perhaps particularly notable are armies like Deathwatch, Adeptus Mechanicus, and Genestealer Cult. Those three in particular have lower play rates versus anything else, so spectacularly small amounts of data. There's just not really much that you can say about, say, 10 players playing with the faction, versus say if you've got far more than that, each playing in big tournaments and getting loads of data for how well the army does overall. With all that in mind though, this is the bottom end of the table from first impressions. Guard kind of in a similar sort of place to where they were before, at 44% wins initially. Maybe not too surprising that they might have dropped down a little bit, given that their best build was nerfed hard. Borgren's Kazakin and Indirect Fire all got hit, though they did get some improvements which might try and compensate a bit, particularly with some of the lesser played Lehman Rosses. Custodies, I don't think anyone will be too surprised to see down here, 44% wins so far. They were very strong pre-Codex, but took some huge nerfs in that, losing lots of defensive rules and a lot of good supporting stratagems. Still maybe not awful in a more casual environment, just due to sheer amount of very tough wounds and big melee on the board, but very likely to struggle in any sort of top tables, given that there's a fair few ways of handling them, and most optimised lists will have enough damage to hit them hard. Tyranids, again not too surprised to see them in the lower tables. They were around 44-45% wins before, and I think their points changes didn't really do enough to get them out of that. The buffs they got fell to units that mainly people weren't playing before, and while a few of them maybe got a bit more tempting, and internal balance got a little bit better. I don't think that it really added strength to the faction overall. Leagues of Votan and Chaos Knights I think are the two armies that I'm perhaps most surprised to see down here. They were both on around about the 47 to 48% wins before, and in the balanced data slate they didn't get any nerfs. The Votan even got a small points cut on the Hearthkin Warriors, which was kind of helpful in making them a bit more relevant. I wouldn't really have expected either of them to be in the top half of the table, really, though I suspect that given a bit more data, they will be heading a bit more towards the mid-tier after this. I guess both of them will wind up with win rates of 45% or more in the long term, even if they have had a bit of a shaky start. Otherwise, though, the bottom three armies by these numbers at the moment are all Space Marine ones. Core Codex Space Marines on 40%, despite having some good builds like the Ironstorm Spearhead. It just happens that Divergent chapters tend to do it better. Dark Angels down at 37%, where I wouldn't really expect them to be weaker than standard Codex Space Marines. Even if you just run a standard Space Marine list plus Azrael, then that often tends to be the same or better than regular Space Marines, to be honest. I guess having nerfs to their Ironstorm plus Stormraven type build that they were doing probably didn't help them too much though. Certainly seems like no one's having any good success with their Codex detachments. Finally, Deathwatch are down at 37% as well. That really was pretty predictable though. They were pretty much the least played and least successful army in the game prior to the update, and then got no help at all besides some peripheral changes within the Codex Space Marine units. Fingers crossed at some point Games Workshop manages to solve the whole Space Marine balance issue they've got going on. It's a bit weird that the core codex can both be one of the strongest and the weakest armies in the game at the same time. Weakest via the average numbers, but things like Black Templar Ironstorm or Space Wolf Stormlance running detachments from the core codex can be some of the stronger armies in the game. Moving up into the mid-table, these are armies at 45 to 50% type wins. At the top of this, we've got Chaos Space Marines. These will be pre-codex numbers, given that we don't have the official points costs out for the codex yet. I was expecting that they'd rise up quite a bit, and it seems like they have. Legionaries, Vindicators, and Chaos Bikers all getting some nice boosts. I feel like these temporary numbers won't really mean much though, given that they've got a whole bunch of detachments to play with. I have a feeling that their codex will probably be doing a little bit better than this at first guess, at least unless they put points up a bit. Drukhari got no points changes and are still doing pretty solidly with their Sky Splinter, win rates are around about 50%. Admate just really didn't have enough numbers to say anything intelligent about them. They're sitting on mid win rates here, which maybe isn't too unexpected. It's not that they can't win games, but they do so in a bit of a painful sort of way. Though at least a few of their other damage deal options became a bit more viable with the points cuts, they're still mainly going to be waiting on the rules updates in summer. Imperial Knights still seem to be holding down the mid-table, kind of similar to where they were before, doing well enough to get good wins, but rarely breaking into the top tables. Tau Empire here with pre-codex numbers, so the last gasp for old-style Kalyona and cyclic ion blasters and things. Will be interesting to see how they do once their new detachments are out. A few points like Riptides and Breaches and Devilfish did go up a bit in that, and wouldn't be too surprised if they shake out kind of similar to this overall after the codex, but we'll wait and see there. Otherwise, we've got World Eaters doing a little bit better than previously with their buffs to Berserkers. Eldari seem to have dropped down a little bit, given nerfs to Swooping Hawks and Shadow Spectres, and Death Guard are currently down on 47%, not massively different to where they were before. I expect them to continue being kind of mid-table, with Plague Marines and Putrefiers and Plague Burst Crawlers and things, and likely Typhus putting in a showing for some mortal wound goodness. Moving up the table to armies that are around 50 to 55% wins. Starting at the bottom this time, we've got the Blood Angels on 52% wins, who honestly seem to have done a little bit better than I was expecting, given the increases to quite a lot of their staple units, like Death Company, Lamarti's Death Company on foot, and their Sanguinary Priests. Seems like the points cuts to the Jump Intercessors and Sanguinary Guard might have been enough to counterbalance that, and it still looks like their Sons of Sanguinius is putting in some showings at some big tournaments. Otherwise, Thousand Sons are broadly doing quite well as well, fairly commonly played compared with where they were, got a couple of nerfs to enhancements, but lots of their supporting units dropped down, including Scarab Occult Terminators. I wouldn't be too surprised if they rose up a bit over the next few weeks with more data. I say the same for the Sisters of Battle as well. Again, they were doing great before and mainly got side grades with their update, a couple of nerfs to minimum sized units, but having things like Ephrael Stern be a more tempting lone operative I think is quite nice for them. Next up, we've got Necrons and Orcs, which I do genuinely think are going to remain being one of the strongest and best armies out there. At time of recording, it looks like Necrons are remaining the most played competitive faction in Grand Tournaments, still doing well despite some nerfs, and particularly with Canoptech Court. And Orcs, as you'd expect, have jumped up the rankings in a big way. Having a big fun new codex certainly helps them out. As most people were predicting, it seems that the most played and most successful detachment are the Bully Boys. Lots of very tanky and very dangerous Mega Knobs, and it does seem that they just have enough raw power to cause problems, and there have been quite a lot of Bully Boy lists placing in the higher echelons of tournaments. Gene Stealer Cult, I think, is a bit of a misnomer for this one. Again, there's so little data that any sort of win rate number for them is pretty meaningless. They did get a couple of nice buffs, including things to their Rock Grinder, but I don't think it's going to be enough to actually change their fortunes this much. Finally, at least for this very early dataset, we've got these 4 armies right at the top in terms of win rates, and they're Grey Knights, Space Wolves, Chaos Demons, and Black Templars. As I've said throughout this is very early data and not worth paying too much attention to, given just 2 weeks of tournaments that are just flat out likely to be some armies that are overrepresented or underrepresented in the wins just through random chance. Out of these in particular, I feel like that probably most applies to Space Wolves and Chaos Demons, maybe a little bit to Black Templars too. Particularly the Wolves and the Demons, though, they don't really have that many players hitting grand tournament tables. I feel like this is probably a bit more representative that they've had a couple of quite good weeks, as opposed to truly being head and shoulders above most of the competition. Despite that, I think it still shows that all of these are certainly strong armies that you can certainly do well with in 40k right now. Grey Knights with all their movement shenanigans are sitting right at the top currently. They're being played in better numbers than they've been in a long time and are one of the more commonly played 40k factions, which is definitely unusual for them. Seems that the nerfs to Dread Knights and Librarians have been borne quite well. They did get some compensatory things to make their power armoured units go down. Otherwise, Space Wolves still seem to be broadly carried by their Stormlance task force with a whole bunch of Thunderwolves plus a bit of support. They didn't really get any huge changes in the balance updates, besides some core space running things like drops to jump intercessors. I'd honestly guess that they'll be dropping down a bit from this 58%, but still remain in the 50 plus sort of bracket. Chaos Demons were quietly doing good win rate things prior to the balanced data slate, though didn't seem to be topping too many events. At least for the first couple of weeks, looks like they've jumped up to 57%. Definitely can be a spooky army to play against. And Black Templars don't seem to have been moved too much yet, despite nerfs to multi-melter vehicles, regular Crusader squads, and their Sword Brethren. They're still one of the very best, if not the best chapter to run Ironstorm Spearhead with tanks with scary multi-melters bolted on, and the Sword Brethren and Helbrecht are still some of the scariest units in the game, and their Primaris Crusader squads with Grimoldus can soak up a whole load of punishment. Having said all that, I'm not sure I'd necessarily rate any of these 4 above Necrons and Orcs, even if the win rates are a little bit higher right now. Definitely a case of more data is needed, but it certainly seems they're all having a good time of it, particularly the Grey Knights. Finally, just for a quick look at big event performance, just as a counterpoint, I thought it could be interesting to take a look at which factions are reliably getting towards the top tables of tournaments. Just for waiting for event size a little bit, this is just a roundup of any armies that placed in the top 5% of placings in tournaments. So say a 60-person event would have the top 3 counted for this. Again, this is aiming to be a more rough and ready temperature check of broadly what's doing well, and of course this will be affected by how many people are playing these factions. If there's more people playing them, then they are likely to have a few more of these placings just by weight of numbers. In any case though, it looks like Orcs do very well at this. 5 big placings, and I think all of them with Bully Boys. Mega Knob's definitely doing the business there. Otherwise, Blood Angels and Grey Knights are next on 4 top 5% placings each. The Sons of Sanguinius still seem to be shaping up very well in spite of the nerfs and things. Then we've got Necrons and Adeptus Auroritus and Thousand Suns, absolutely no surprises in seeing them here. And then following up, we've got Black Templars, Index Tau, Chaos Demons, Index Chaos Space Marines, and then 1 placing each for Dark Angels, Marines, Space Wolves, and Astra Militarum. The Space Wolves not doing quite as well at cracking the top tables versus their win rate, it seems. Obviously very early days, but I think it's alright for a quick rough temperature check of the last few weeks. Anything not mentioned here didn't place in the top 5% at any point. I feel like most of these tally up at least somewhat well with win rates and what I'd expect though. Maybe Blood Angels placing a bit higher than I might have expected given the points changes they got. It's nice to see them adapting well though, and Chaos Demons being a bit more of a credible threat to the top of tournaments. In any case though, let me know what you make of just a few initial rough numbers. I'll certainly be looking forward to doing a bit more of an in-depth look at stuff a bit later on when we've got a few more weeks data built up and things are a bit more certain. And plus people have had a bit more time to adapt to their armies, finding out what really works well in practice rather than just in theorycraft. Let me know any thoughts or insights on the post points update meta as well. I'll be interested to hear any takes or things I might have missed down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.